So that concludes the plenary part of our agenda today. So we'll turn to the deep dive sessions, a review of all of the work that was done in the month of November, the sessions that were led by various USDA agencies and participated by many folks, many of which are on the phone with us today. So the way we designed this in thinking with our organizing committee was that, you know, in a normal workshop that you would attend in person, you might have these breakout sessions, and then there would be report outs, you know, at some point in the agenda that would kind of wrap things up and kind of synthesize all the comments that had been contributed. So in doing this, we decided for a virtual format, it might be best to go ahead and have the breakout sessions in advance. We could dedicate more time to each one of those. We could have the right folks available to lead the session depending on the agency responsibilities for the topic. So we had these 6 sessions that we conducted throughout the month of November. So I know many of you are familiar with those. We had aquaculture production research, aquatic health, environmental management, product innovation and technology, product consumer marketing, and supporting aquaculture. And so, as already been mentioned this morning, we had, I think, 10 agencies and 7 mission areas that participated in leading these sessions, and there were other folks that were also on the phone from USDA who were listening in. So next slide, please, Peggy. So we have this vision for aquaculture. This is a vision that comes from an interagency document that was mentioned this morning, the science plan. So this is something that is not just specific to USDA, but when I read it and you see all the things that go into that vision, it's going to take a lot of agencies and a lot of mission areas, and it'll take more than just USDA alone to be able to provide the support that is needed from the federal government for expanding U.S. aquaculture. So next slide, please. So USDA is a big place. We have 8 mission areas, 29 agencies, and I'm sorry, 17 agencies, and there's actually 29 total offices that are under the secretary. I'm showing the organizational chart here in the bottom left. On the right are the different mission areas, and parentheses are the number of agencies that contribute to each one of those mission areas. And so, as I mentioned, 7 of those are the ones that led the different sessions that we had during the month of November. So the next slide, please. And so we wanted to kind of give a summary of who was able to participate in all of the breakout sessions. And so we captured the email addresses that were used to register. So at the top, I have on this table listed all of the different sessions. The first line is the number of folks that registered. The next line in participants is all the folks that actually logged on to the session. USDA.gov is simply the number of USDA email addresses that were able to join the session and folks that were either leading or in listening mode. Other.gov was either other federal agencies or state agencies or others with a .gov email address that were participating, and we know that certainly there were other federal agencies and other state agencies that joined us. .edu, we had many academic folks that were on the phone and able to join in our conversations. And then our other category is all the other kinds of email addresses and folks on the phone where we weren't able to assign them to a category that were participating. These are producers, folks from other supporting industries and fish feeds and fish health and manufacturing gear and so on and so forth that were able to log on and participate, many of which we're also representing organizations, allied stakeholder groups that like the National Aquaculture Association that were able to join and contribute input. So next slide. And so the last thing that I want to do before we start the report outs from the breakout is point everyone to this website, USDA.gov, topics, farming, and aquaculture. This is the aquaculture site that we use to share information, and I understand it's kind of hard to read on the slide, but if you go to this slide, you'll see information on aquaculture. We have information on the aquaculture working group. We have information on USDA's participation in the subcommittee on aquaculture through NSTC and OSTP. And then at the bottom, you'll see the different mission areas, and if you clicked on any of those links, you will find how each agency relates to Aquaculture, you will find the programs that are relevant, links to those programs, and you will find contact information for individuals who are associated with those programs in case you have a question and would like to reach out. So this is also the site where we plan to put the presentation from this workshop, from this webinar. We also plan to put the recording, and in the future, we have asked all of our session chairs to come together and contribute to a white paper that will summarize all of the input that everyone gave us over the month of November, and including what folks care to contribute through next Friday, December the 18th, at the email addresses that Peggy had listed earlier. So we invite folks to continue to contribute input, and this is the site that we'll use to post all of the information in the future once we have it finalized. So next slide, please. And so as you recall, these were the breakout sessions, and so these are the reports that we'll go through for today. And the first will be aquaculture production research. This was hosted by Dr. Amrit, Bart, and Christopher Green from USDA-NIFA. So with that, I would invite Amrit to go ahead and give us his report out. And in doing so, Amrit, I would also like to wish you a happy birthday. Go ahead.
Thank you, Caird. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
That's good. Okay. Good. Thank you, everyone, for joining this. It's great that we have such large number of participants joining and also staying with it. So I'm happy to report on behalf of our group on aquaculture production research. Our agencies involved, as noted, is NIFA and ARS. And as Caird just indicated, we had about 79 total participants in our breakout session. And there was a fairly even distribution between government, educators, and the private sector. So this is good combination. Couple of points I wanted to raise before I went ahead with reporting out. First of all, this is not an analysis. This is not intended to be analysis. It was just reporting out what was said. So not much analysis went into this. Is into the presentation, mostly observations and what people, participants said. And the second thing I wanted to point out is that there was a full 3-hour session during our workshop, in which we were divided into, at least for the second half, it was divided into 3 groups. So altogether, we had maybe over 5-7 hours of discussion. And so I'm kind of presenting all of this in 10 minutes. So this is going to be mostly high-level messages. So maybe perhaps some of the details of the discussion may be missing, or if there are any points that were not presented here and you were present in any of those sessions, please feel free to submit comments and suggestions for our final report that we will prepare as a group. And then the third thing I wanted to say is that as I listened to all the 3 presenters, Stephanie, Jim, and Bill, this pretty much reinforces what was presented. So some of this may be redundant, so that's a good thing. So we're at least capturing what the issues, what the challenges, and what the opportunities are. So our group, we had slightly different format than the other groups. Initially, we started out with the plenary session discussion in the first part, and that was discussing broader issues about, how do we see aquaculture in long term, for example, 10 years time, and what should USDA be doing with respect to helping or addressing some of the concerns of aquaculture industry. So those are more of a high-level discussion. Then we split into smaller groups, and the smaller groups are divided into finfish, shellfish, and algae, seaweed, kelp groups. In each of these sections, we try to address challenges and opportunities in genetics and breeding, feed and feeding, culture systems and engineering, So they were kind of spread throughout these three areas. Next slide, please. So again, the high-level discussion or the high-level readout messages is listed here. We were asking the general question of USDA support aquaculture research: what work, what has, and what more needs to be done to take aquaculture to the next level, and what do we see moving in the long term for ourselves as aquaculture develops. And the answers were very they were varied, and we spent quite a bit of time talking about where we should be in 10 years. General consensus was that we should certainly be on the leader in aquaculture, and we should certainly be in top 10 in the 10 years time. And aquaculture development needs to go through incentivizing customers to the value of seafood, reducing risk to farmers, less reliance on imports, more domestically produced and processed species in the market that I would like to see. So these are the kind of discussions we had around what we would like to see in a long term in U.S. aquaculture industry. The other points that was made in this broader dialogue or discussion was that USDA support to aquaculture is critical. There are several participants were pleased with the innovative initiatives the USDA has taken to the industry, particularly in the time of stress. One of the examples that was provided was the split pond research or hybrid catfish research that was critical at a time when catfish industry was not doing so well in the early in the 80s and 90s. And programs like SBIR or regional aquaculture centers and aqua competitive funding helped the industry to recover by supporting these targeted research. So that was shown as something that was appreciated by the industry and educators. The other point that was made is that the need for, again, high quality applications, more visibility, and again, more high quality proposal means more funding. So that was something that was highlighted in the discussion. Again, several of the industry participants agreed that direct support to farmers or through SBIR has been critical. Next. The other couple of other points that were made is that the funding a modern research laboratory was particularly useful because the industries themselves cannot develop these high-tech laboratories. So collaboration between USDA, university labs, and producer and hatchery is important to keeping everyone involved. There was quite a bit of discussion though around how universities, hatcheries sometimes tended to compete with small seed producers, and there was some discussions around that. But then that discussion went around, say, to addressing that by suggesting that there needs to be better communication between universities and the private sectors. There was again, optimism on open ocean offshore aquaculture. That is a part of this recent executive order, and certainly the question around that was that there's a great deal of basic infrastructure that's needed in various fronts, and looking at the role for USDA and NOFA and NOAA was important. NOAA's role being more on the siting and regulation, and USDA's role being on the feed, seed, and health of the organisms that are produced in marine environments. the final point that was that I had listed was that the funding for NIFA supported aquaculture production research has been flat for a long time. This was something that was raised by several attendees, and there was interest in having additional resources made available to both competitive and some of these formula grants. Next. After this general session, then we moved to the breakout session, and the breakout session mostly addressed particular issues on finfish, shellfish, or seaweed or algae, and in that in each of the areas we tried to address or ask the audience to speak about the seed, feed, or systems as it relates to these specific broader areas, and also what can USDA do to help research funding and results to make it more accessible to the community. On the points that were raised, at least the high-level readout, it includes funding for research related to production of novel species, because a lot of the current funding goes to, I guess, catfish research was named as getting a large share of this funding, and then so there was a suggestion that production of other novel species should be paid attention to as well. These novel species, as they evolve into aquaculture species or commercial aquaculture species, the support from lab to scaling up to universities getting involved and USDA supporting needs to be enhanced as well, was one of the points made. Again, need for seed systems. There was a lot of discussion around cost of seed being exceptionally high in the U.S. and partly due to smaller scales. If they're newer species, there aren't as many hatcheries producing them. So there may be competition between hatcheries from time to time, and shortages when during the growing season. And one of the point that was made was that because eggs are not available year-round, partly due to not having as many grow-out customers. So there's always ebb and flow of eggs or seed, and that's not allowing industry to expand as quickly as it could or can. So suggestion was that USDA may perhaps help build infrastructure through resources, conferences, networking opportunities to connect stakeholders. Next. On the discussion of shellfish, the comments or the opportunities and challenges were similar to that described by Bill in the past earlier presentation. Again, there was optimism looking at the open ocean technology development for shellfish. Is seen as important part that USDA could and should get involved with. Mussels offshore, long line production was shown as one of the examples. Diseases, we didn't spend a lot of time discussing diseases because in our next breakout session, there's more discussion around that, but there were a couple of points made with respect to invasive species funded projects. There's a need for more invasive species funded projects, and then USDA should focus on proposals that are devoted to heat resistance or disease resistance in shellfish because there's a changing ocean environments. The other point that was made in Shellfish session was that stakeholder input to disseminate information was critical. USDA should develop some sort of newsletter or some sort of communication channel to inform stakeholders where and when funding opportunities are coming available. Another point that was made was marketing and education of outreach should be how USDA sets standards for shellfish production. Next. And final breakout session, the third breakout session was on algae, seaweed, and kelp. And there, again, the discussion was very robust. Participants were very animated in discussing about what some of the challenges and opportunities are in this arena. And they, again, overlap at least with some of the findings that that Stephanie highlighted in her discussion at National Seaweed Hub. So one of the things that the participants were saying was that most of the U.S. where seaweed is grown has high nutrient levels and is naturally growing environment. Therefore, it should have high nutrient value. And some people suggested that sea lettuce grown in the U.S. has a different nutritional value than that's grown in Asia and in South America. Therefore, it should have a better value. Again, seaweed is known to clean up pollutant water, has restorative actions, and this makes U.S. grown seaweed more special. Another point that was made along these lines was the USDA should focus its research on nutritional value of seaweeds, identify chemical residues in seaweeds and harmful algae toxins to be marketed regarding seafood safety. The next major point in this session was the market. So domestic market is limited, so USDA needs to help the industry with aggressive marketing strategy for seaweed, not only nationally, but also internationally. Next, please. So I think this is the final slide on this algae, seaweed, kelp. So again, USDA should help with setting industry standards for seaweed products. That's, for example, coming up with verification process or assisting with verification process. Addressing fundamental science questions regarding breeding, growth, and microalgae, and get it translated into production was another point that was made by this group. There was also requests for clarity on new offshore permitting effects on seaweed industry. How does the permitting effect come from marine sanctuaries, whale protection, food safety restrictions, etc. So overall, our session on these three finfish sessions, these were the primary topics of discussion. Again, these are high-level messages. A lot of in-depth discussion was had in under each of these headings. If we didn't somehow cover all of those that you wanted to have in-depth discussion, please don't hesitate to send us additional comments as we move forward in the weeks ahead. Caird?
Amrit, thank you. And we do have some questions, and I'll ask you to address this one. Speaking about AFRI grants, when are the remaining award announcements for animal health and production and animal products going to be released? Seems to be the only remaining from the early spring 2020 RFA that has not been announced.
Yeah, I think that I don't recall when the new batch will be released. Maybe Tim, who is in this call, may have specific dates, but they are in our website, and if you would like something additional to what is in the website, I'm happy to provide the information a bit later.
Okay, great, thank you. So now we'll turn to Dr. Kathleen Hartman from USDA-Aphis, who will talk about the aquatic health session. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Awesome. Thanks, Caird. I just want to check my volume. Everybody, okay, perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. And thank you for everybody who attended our deep dive session on aquatic animal and aquaculture health. Just some statistics on our session. We had 109 attendees for a little over 3 hours. We had 3 breakout sessions, and in each of those breakout sessions discussed the questions that you see below. And in the subsequent slides, I'm going to take a deep dive into the stakeholder input that we had on each of these messages, and then finally wrap up this session on the high-level messages that we heard. Next slide, please. So the first question that we tackled was, what is Aphis's role for aquatic animal health? And should it be different or the same as we have for traditional livestock commodities and species? And the overwhelming message was that yes, aquaculture is agriculture, and that USDA should be handling aquaculture the same that we do for our other traditional livestock species. However, aquaculture is different, and quite simply, aquaculture is just that, aquaculture. Traditional USDA animal health programs are very pathogen-centric. And I'm sure you can appreciate after listening to all the speakers this morning that aquaculture is very different because of the vast diversity of the species that are in production, the production methods that can be used, and also the many, many end uses that the animals we are producing in this country go to. Food, research, ornamentals, pet species. And so it is the most expansive agricultural sector, I think, that we have here. Another resounding sentiment was that as USDA is the lead for those other livestock commodities, USDA really does need to lean in to the animal health role that is needed for aquaculture, aquatic animal health across the board. And again, that aquaculture is aquaculture, and when it is conducted for the purpose of farming, should be viewed, led, and regulated like the other agricultural commodities. Next slide, please. Our next question was, what are the biggest obstacles for Aphis to be viewed as the lead federal authority for aquatic animal health? Sentiments that rose to the top for this question out of our breakout sessions were obviously the recognition of limited resources, both in funding dollars and expertise. We have on our aquaculture health team, we are very small, but we are mighty. But we do need to expand our expertise, both internally within USDA, but also continue to grow and support the professional private individuals that are out there conducting aquatic animal health work, particularly our accredited veterinarians that are so needed by our aquaculture producers in order to help them manage livestock health, endorse export health certificates, and also bring what I refer to as that swagger to the aquaculture farm, where we do a comprehensive livestock management planning for biosecurity, disease investigation plans, and routine surveillance operations on the farm, looking for these pathogens of concern, not only the ones that are internationally reportable, but the ones that are impacting production on the farm at where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. Also, we have been struggling for many years now in finding USDA's legs for what is the appropriate leadership role for aquaculture health in this country. And as we see the enormous growth of aquaculture in this country in all aspects, it has become very clear to us that USDA is the lead for aquatic animal health in this country, and that we need to really dive in and find out what are the best ways that we can do that. Our aquaculture team within Vet Services has spent this year really diving in and developing a very robust and sound business plan, moving all the units working within Vet Services to a more unified page, if you will, that we're moving forward together on the important issues and topics on aquatic animal health in this country. We heard also that we need to do better at communication, not only with our stakeholders, but also our state partners in helping these farms become more productive, secure from aquatic animal pathogens, and also secure in biocontainment from having any pathogens leave those farms, so that we ensure the safety and security of our natural resources. And finally, and we've heard this, and it delights me in so many ways to hear so many references to the work that we've been doing on a new national plan for aquatic animal health. We have spent a long time and actually many years diving into what would a comprehensive national plan look like and provide the infrastructure for what our producers need to have secure stocks and facilitate the safe movement of the animals in this country and around the world. Next slide, please. This other question was, what gaps exist for Aphis to meet the demands and needs of the domestic aquaculture industry? Again, we come back to these repetitive themes here on the presence of our leadership for aquatic animal health and disease issues. Again, improve those relationships and strengthen our communication with state and natural resource agencies that can be very strong partners with not only our aquatic livestock commodities, but other entities, federal and at the state level, to ensure that we are approaching aquaculture health in a consistent and uniform manner across all agencies, protecting not only the production of privately owned animals, publicly reared animals, and also our natural resources. We need consistent requirements for animal movement and trade. For too many decades now, our industry has been wrought with ever-changing requirements that seem to change the moment they need their animals to move, and hard to find information as well. So we definitely have an area of growth here that we need to address. We are hopeful that between the Comprehensive Aquaculture Health Program Standards, known as CAPS, and the new national plan, that we are working towards this very goal of making animal movement better, more easier to figure out how to get that done, and create a uniform plan that would be recognized not only by our domestic state partners, but also by international trading partners. And finally, on this point too, is standardization to pathogen testing. I think our industry feels very strongly that they are not burying their heads in the sand, and I can vouch for them there. They are doing a lot of testing. However, as we begin to move forward, I think it is really important that we create a system that really provides and empowers the testing information that our producers are doing. And again, that lends itself to really doing a deep dive into the assays that we're using, how those assays are performing in our different laboratories, as well as the impacts of sampling activities such as pooling of samples and sample handling, to make sure that the money that is being paid for this testing is worth the results that we're getting on the paper. And I hope that everybody is supportive of that. It is a really heavy lift we are finding within our team, but it is definitely one of our priority goals, is to make sure that we address that as quickly and as comprehensively as we can. Next slide, please. The other question was, how can Aphis strengthen work with stakeholders and partners across a diverse industry? And I'll tell you, I had an opportunity through one of the deep dives, and I know this is not veterinary related, but I learned so much about seaweed culture and the different processes that are part of seaweed development. And so again, it's such a wonderful industry to be a part of. One, because it's so almost new to this scene of regulation, and there's so many opportunities these days for verification of U.S. farm-raised animals and products, which I think is super cool. So again, we hear this, I'm hearing you loud and clear about improved communication and partnerships. We need to develop meaningful guidance that can be shared on a public-facing system so that everybody, again, has the opportunity to work in a consistent and uniform manner as we begin to handle these large topics. And finally, all the work that we do in Aphis, whether it's ARS or vet services, that we really need to focus on the issues and help industry develop real solutions for these problems in real time. Next slide, please. The final questions actually were two that I've combined here into one. Are, if there were two things that Aphis could do today to promote and protect aquatic animal health, what would they be? And there you'll see a little summary of the list of things that we heard. Focus on increasing available vaccines and all the requirements that would make the development and licensing of vaccines stronger for our U.S. producers, availability of drugs and feed ingredients so that we can support and grow these healthy animals, improve, strengthen, and get some import controls so that what we are asking the industry, the biosecurity and surveillance on the farm, is protected from the introduction of foreign animal diseases. We need to help strengthen our veterinary workforce through our accredited veterinarians and our training modules that are available freely online. We heard that you guys would like a needs assessment, and certainly our NAMS folks, which is the National Animal Health Monitoring System, are already working with representatives from the National Aquaculture Association on a NAMS survey for aquaculture, hopefully in 2022. The proposed study, if you guys remember, the last NAMS study was in 2010, and it focused only on the catfish industry. This new survey would take a broader look at domestic aquaculture to determine really what your needs are and where we can focus a lot of our aquatic animal health work. We need to increase our relationships and strengthen those with our state agencies and foreign counterparts, have a greater opportunity for cooperative agreements to get a lot of this work done, to answer these questions that we need to help you all protect your animals, of course, and we're already working on it, almost done, develop a new aquaculture health plan that would be national and comprehensive in scope. And next slide, please. This is my final slide. Just getting ready for the next speaker to be on deck. That aquaculture is definitely agriculture, and it should not be viewed any different. And aquaculture is farming. And USDA needs to do a better job and really lean in. I loved that term, to be the lead authority for aquatic animal health in this country, improve communications, make sure that the research and the work that we do are being done to address the issues that the industry has, and we've heard a lot of those already today. And finally, that the U.S. aquaculture industry needs a comprehensive national plan that affords the consistency and integrity to verify animal health, which will in the end secure markets and facilitate safe animal movement. Thanks, you guys. It's been so much fun to be a part of this process. And again, if anybody has other comments that you haven't shared and you would like to share, please email me or Caird and Peggy. They'll get those messages to me by December 18th. Thanks, Caird. I'll turn it back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathleen. And so next we'll move on to environmental management. We have Dr. Jean Kim and Jan Surface from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So Jean, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Caird. So I want to give you a quick readout on the environmental management deep dive session. We had 5 agencies involved. We were actually the first of the 6 sessions, so we sort of paved the way for many of the other sessions. If you look at the list of attendees that were participating, we had about 80 participants. Over half were actually USDA or other federal employees, about 10% from universities, probably either research or extension, and about a third were unaffiliated. So we heard from 5 different agencies or offices on the role of environmental management and how USDA can engage to support U.S. aquaculture. I'll give you a quick bottom line up front. I think one top line thing that we heard is with respect to environmental management, with the possible exception of the Aphis role in animal health, a lot of the USDA role for environmental management is sort of an indirect education and consultation with other agencies for regulatory actions, as well as using research, extension, and voluntary conservation to help avoid the need for regulation. So we had 2 agencies that were listed here that are more, have presented information that were more directly and indirectly involved with regulatory issues for environmental management. Dr. Kathleen Hartman presented information from 2 parts of Aphis, both Vet Services, who takes the lead on animal health issues, as well as Aphis Wildlife Services. That part provides the federal leadership for resolving wildlife conflicts with people and with the ag community. Dr. Tiyoung Chin spoke on the role of the Office of Pest Management Policy. Many of you may not be as familiar with this, so I'll speak a little on their role. That office exists to consider pest management and pesticide policy risks and engage other federal agencies in their regulatory process. So that includes EPA and FDA and other agencies. So providing expertise on pesticides, anti-fouling agents, algicides, herbicides, and a variety of other chemicals is part of their role. For example, for the 15-year EPA pesticide registration review, they would engage EPA and provide information and perspective from U.S. agriculture. The other 3 agencies that presented were more of a non-regulatory role. Jan and I spoke to NRCS's conservation technical assistance, as well as our financial assistance that can help producers better manage their land and address the natural resource concerns on their operations. This includes natural resource concerns related to water management, wildlife enhancement, engineering issues, energy conservation, and other resulting issues. Dr. Amrit Bart presented NIFA's role in terms of extramural research, education, and extension programming for environmental issues. They work primarily through the Land Grant Network and beyond. And Dr. Caird Rexroad spoke about the ARS Aquaculture National Program 106 that works with intramural ARS scientists who conduct a variety of research for commercial aquaculture species, reducing impacts with the environment. Next slide, please. So we were the first, again, we were the first of the deep dive sessions, so we cast a wide net of input. You don't need to read all of this, but we generally want to know from what you know about USDA's role in environmental management, what are we doing that we're doing well? What are we not doing that we should be doing more of? And what are the current and emerging constraints to U.S. aquaculture, both the current industry as well as growth of the industry that USDA should engage more in. Next slide, please. So I'll give you the top 3 readout messages that we heard, and I'll take a deeper dive into each of them in the next slides. In general, we heard the need for capacity building to improve USDA's knowledge and expertise about aquaculture and its interactions with the environment. This would better assist our farmers when they come to our conservation and assistance programs. As well, it would help us inform other regulatory agencies such as EPA, Fish and Wildlife, and state partners when they engage on their regulations for environmental management. The second general theme we heard is we need both regulatory engagement by USDA coupled with research and development as well as extension to address a broad suite of both current and emerging environmental issues that are constraining U.S. aquaculture. You see a list there that includes wildlife interactions, pest management, nutrients, water quality issues, aquaculture in the offshore environment, biotechnology, and climate. And finally, we heard a theme of needing to address public comments or public concerns or misconceptions about the environmental sustainability of aquaculture. We heard one solution could be taking a broader food systems approach to assess and optimize aquaculture production and the resulting sustainability of our system. Next slide, please. So let's look a little closer at the first issue of capacity building. We heard loud and clear that we need more knowledge and expertise specific to aquaculture throughout the USDA universe. That starts at the local level, at the county, with the USDA Service Center staff, with the need for more county agents, as well as state extension specialists for aquaculture, all the way to national headquarters when we have consultations with our federal and state regulatory partners in order to make better regulations for aquaculture. USDA was also called to use its data, its outreach, and regulatory consultations to address a variety of issues that are constraining aquaculture, including wildlife. Front and center was the issue of bird depredation, but also water quality, water quantity, and nutrient management with other federal partners, including EPA, as well as engaging more in the coastal environment on the expansion of aquaculture, both in coastal waters as well as federal offshore waters, working with partners like Sea Grant and NOAA. Next slide, please. And in terms of the needs for our research, extension, and technology development agencies, we need better technology that can both assess the issues for nutrients, water quality, and quantity, as well as solve some of those issues through better design and technology. There were some emerging issues that were discussed for which USDA should increase their research portfolio. A lot of discussion occurred on what our appropriate role is in the offshore aquaculture environment in terms of both our role for animal health, our role for environmental mitigation, and others like species suitability analysis and marketing, but also to look at the sustainability improvements due to biotechnology improvements, genetically modified or edited organisms, and to look at the impacts of climate change to build a more resilient industry. Finally, for a lot of these new opportunities, we need to have different and broader funding opportunities to address these bigger issues. Oftentimes, what we heard that oftentimes our requests for proposals are relatively narrow. So when we're dealing with something like the need to couple USDA's expertise in aquafeed development to the offshore environment that's managed by NOAA and other partners, or if we're looking at the role of aquaculture and health policy, we're going to need different co-funding opportunities with NOAA, with NIH, with NSF, etc. Next slide, please. Finally, the broadest topic that we heard of is we need to engage more on the social dimension that drives the lack of public support for aquaculture. And that includes the public perception of how aquaculture interacts with the environment. So there's a need to better understand, better integrate, and better assess aquaculture in a food systems approach. And hopefully by fully understanding the footprint of aquaculture, all the way from soil to seed to feed to farm to plate, we can better connect aquaculture with the larger food system, and we can also position aquaculture to be a tool to be used to mitigate some of the environmental issues that we're dealing with from outside the farm, water quality issues from urban centers, from agriculture, sequestration of carbon or nutrient, and with a goal for potential mitigation and environmental credits. So in summary, you know, again, we heard a lot of different approaches, and again, with the possible exception of animal health regulations from Aphis in terms of environmental management. Oftentimes we don't make the rule, but the USDA can make the rule better. And we can do this through our regulatory consultation, our data, our voluntary conservation, our research and extension, and hopefully both make the rule better and avoid the need for regulation. So that is what we've heard, and we look forward to hearing more and working with the group as we move toward a white paper. Thanks, Caird.
Thank you, Gene. So next, we'll move on to production, innovation, and technology, and we'll hear from Dr. Tim Sullivan and Christopher Green from USDA-NIFA. Tim, go ahead.
Can you hear me all right?
Sure can.
Yes, Tim, we can hear you just fine.
Thank you, Peggy. So my name is Tim Sullivan. I'm a National Program Leader in Aquaculture and Animal Health at NIFA. And I was one of the folks who engaged in the product innovation and technology deep dive. There were 3 agencies involved. NIFA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, was represented by myself and Chris Green. The Agricultural Research Service was represented by Caird Rexroad. And the Economic Research Service was represented by Keith Fughley. So our session had 69 attendees. 29 of those had private sector affiliations, were a combination of aquaculture farmers, processors, and consultants. 13 had academic affiliations, so university researchers and administrators. 25 had government affiliations. They were a mix of state governments, NOAA, the USDA, Fish and Wildlife Service, and FDACS. And 2 individuals had nonprofit affiliations, the World Wildlife Fund and the AVMA. Next slide, please. So the product innovation and technology deep dive was broken up into 2 breakouts. The first had 2 questions. The first of those questions was what USDA activities are having a particularly positive impact in the area of product innovation and technology. And there were 3 activities that were sort of widely discussed among the 3 rooms. The first was the ARS genetic breeding programs and how important they were for particular species where there have been a focus. The consensus was that that program has made significant contributions, and there was interest among a number of parties to expand those programs to additional emerging species for development. The second activity was the Sbir, Small Business Innovative Research Program. It was noted that that program had a very positive impact on tool development and system development, and overall a positive impact on aquaculture development wholly. The third program was the Regional Aquaculture Centers. it was noted that the regional aquaculture centers are a critical part of private-public cooperation and in addressing local and regional issues, particularly through the inclusion of producers and industry representatives on the committees that those RACs have in order to guide their organization and also to review proposals for funding. It was noted that the regional aquaculture centers could be more impactful if their budgets were not limited and if they were adjusted so that they could include indirect costs within their organizational structure. The second question was, what role should the USDA play in the continued development of technology? So there were three kind of themes that emerged from the discussion. The first was in education. So in educating the public about the development of aquaculture, about the way that new technology sort of fuels that development and how it allows us to sort of feed the world. It was also noted that that education can be an important part of creating a U.S. population that is more open and understanding of the role that aquaculture production plays. The second was a continued emphasis on extension and supporting extension positions as a link between the tools that are developed through research programs and their actual application on farms. So a lot of folks noted that extension is really a critical part of the development of new products, new technologies, new ideas, because that's really the area where they get put into practice in a meaningful way. The third comment that I wanted to highlight was that there was discussion on continuing focus and funding to address impediments to aquaculture development and doing it in very particular ways. The first is not to just address sort of priority issues, but to address them in a way that prioritizes automation and reduces costs, labor costs that farms face. So with only so many hours in a day, so many problems that have to be overcome, it's important to address those problems in really targeted, sensible manners that reduce costs as much as possible. The second point is to continue a focus on basic research that sort of drives production, matching feed formulations to life stages, closing life cycles in culture, improving resistance and nutritional quality. Next slide, please. So these are the three questions that were posed in the second breakout. The first was, what are the most pressing issues that the USDA's product innovation and technology work should focus on? The second, what can the USDA do to make its work in product innovation more accessible to the aquaculture community? And third, where would you like to see U.S. aquaculture in 10 years? And what do you think the USDA can do to facilitate that vision? Next slide, please. So I took the sort of the record of the second breakout among the three rooms and sort of tried to sum it up in five main themes. The first I've already talked a little bit about, which is reducing labor and time. So there were a number of comments made among the rooms about the importance of automation, both processing automation, but also thinking about ways in which we can utilize sort of innovations in sensor technology and non-invasive sampling to reduce personnel hours while also more effectively monitoring stocks. So both stocks in terms of the number of fish, but also the overall health when we think about monitoring for potential pathogen epidemics and outbreaks. The second was genetic research. So there were many facets to this, but really focused on innovative approaches to driving breeding programs for particular desired traits, thinking about disease resistance, and nutrition and feed matching. The third point was really that I wanted to highlight was really, there was a lot of talk about diversity of portfolio for the USDA. So thinking about how do we balance emerging parts of the aquaculture sector with existing parts of the aquaculture sector? How do we balance the effort that we put into onshore aquaculture with coastal aquaculture and offshore aquaculture? They all have issues they face. They're all extremely important, and they all continue to need to be supported and developed. And then when we think about the species that are produced, from finfish to shellfish to aquatic plants and even to aquaponics, they all require specific tools and technologies that need to be developed and fostered. And so how do we create a system that balances all of those needs, but also, really importantly, doesn't just focus on large producers, but protects small farms and small businesses when we think about both supporting innovative technologies, but also supporting the farms that need those technologies so that they can maximize their productivity. Next slide, please. So the last two themes that I wanted to highlight, the first was there were quite a few folks that talked about finding a way to provide market advantage to US production through innovation. And this was really a lot of talk on focusing on ways to highlight what makes US aquaculture production unique and different from, other markets that typically sell to the US. So things like focusing on nutrition, focusing on sustainability and overall health, and sort of driving that advantage through unique or potentially unique labeling and education initiatives that sort of give US producers a leg up and open the eyes of US consumers to how good US produced seafood can be. And the final point is one that came up actually in both breakout sessions, and I sort of wanted to summarize it at the end, and that was the persistent decline in aquaculture extension personnel. I talked a little bit about extension being a critical link between tool and development and innovation and sort of on-farm initiatives and the ability to take those sort of ideas and put them into practice. And over the past 2 decades, there has been a consistent decline in aquaculture extension personnel across the country. Seasoned extension specialists retire without replacements. And in many times, overall, for both terrestrial and aquatic extension, there are fewer personnel. So they are covering larger swaths of the country. They're covering more areas, so both terrestrial and aquatic programs. Many times they may not have aquatic backgrounds because that's only one part of their portfolio. And they are really, again, to highlight a critical link between research and stakeholders, and that makes them an integral part of this process and a really important part of farm success. And it's really something that folks stress the USDA needed to think about and continue to find a way to support, because, aquaculture extension, research, extension, and education are really 3 parts of like cogs in a wheel, and without each of those cogs functioning at their best, that wheel doesn't work that well. So really a continued focus on that, I think folks felt would be particularly impactful. With that, I'll turn it back to Caird. Thank you all very much.
Excellent, Tim, thank you. And so next we'll turn to Dr. Carl Schroeder from the Agricultural Marketing Service to talk about product and consumer marketing. So Carl, please go ahead.
Thank you, Caird. And I'd like to start by acknowledging several of my colleagues that assisted in helping to run the deep dive session for product and consumer marketing. Jennifer Tucker is our Deputy Administrator at AMS for the National Organic Program, and she gave an overview of the program and organic standards. And I wanted to draw your attention to a question that came in earlier in the chat, and I replied. The organic standards for aquaculture are not on the current regulatory agenda. However, Dr. Tucker and her colleagues in our national organic program wanted me to underscore that they certainly look forward to continuing to engage closely with the aquaculture industry to continue to have conversations about potential standards and what it is you need from her and her team. David Jackson and Christina Riley, who's with the Food and Nutrition Service, the two of them led a discussion session on federal nutrition assistance programs. My colleague Angie Snyder and Jeff Waite, they led a discussion on marketing tools, in particular process verified programs. And my colleague Steve Wisnett, he didn't have a speaking role, but I did want to flag him out. Steve has been the person who's led our effort at developing new purchase specifications for various seafood items that we have begun procuring for federal nutrition assistance programs. You'll see in the pie chart in the lower right that we had a good cross-section of participants. Next slide, please. The first breakout, again, the focus was on federal nutrition assistance programs. There's just a few items I'd like to flag out for you. The Agricultural Marketing Service, one of the key functions we do is purchase food for federal nutrition assistance programs. The best known of those is the National School Lunch Program, but there's also about 10 or so others that we procure food for. And one of the items that was discussed is we have two avenues for procurement. One is through entitlement and one is through what's called Section 32. Entitlement refers to programs like the National School Lunch Program where recipients, based on their calculated need, are entitled to a certain amount of food from the federal government. And they will place orders against what we call our list of foods available. And then we will go out and try to purchase food to fill those orders. Our entitlement programs are very much recipient driven. We do our best to be responsive to what recipients indicate they would like. We do purchase some aquacultured items through our entitlement program, catfish, tuna, salmon, etc. And I do think there's potential avenues to get some other aquacultured items into that program. And at the Agricultural Marketing Service, we can certainly help the industry do that. Entitlement programs should be viewed as a longer term effort. We try to develop support amongst recipients. We wait for their signal through feedback and then begin those purchases. In contrast to that is what's called our Section 32 purchase program. The term Section 32, it comes from the section of the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1935, whereby Congress gives us the authority to make these purchases. And the way these work is industry petitions USDA to make purchases, typically because surpluses have built up. There's a concern that prices will collapse and industry needs us to come in and make purchases. And this past year, in light of the COVID pandemic, we've begun some new purchases. For example, we did a Section 32 purchase of ocean perch and various New England groundfish. We did one of shrimp. several others are under consideration that, again, are a direct result of COVID, where the industry has approached us for purchase relief. And so that's something where we look forward to continuing to work with the industry to try to make effective purchases. We talked about the AMS vendor requirements, what those entail. I won't go into that in any depth here, other than to say we did reference participants to our website where they can find out about what those requirements are, and we're happy to help potential vendors work their way through those. And we talked about truckload quantity purchases. We typically purchase in 40,000 pound units for our programs, just based on the need that's there, and those are the quantities we typically need. As an example, in fiscal year 20, just ending in October, we purchased approximately 45 million pounds of fish items at a cost of roughly $105 million. Next slide, please. The other item that we spoke about was the marketing tools that we have that we can bring to bear to help the industry. And Angie and Jeff really focused the discussion on what we call our process verified programs. And so these are programs, just a couple of key points, where industry and individual companies really develop what the marketing standards are. And then AMS, our interest is to make sure they're auditable and verifiable. And if they are, then we will audit and verify against the company standards and provide a government logo that can go on packaging and help market that product. There's tremendous flexibility in the standards. They can be broad, they can be narrow. It really depends on what the company or the industry seeks to achieve. Some examples include those for traceability, product origin, and product identification. And items that we promote that have been very popular for the other proteins that we develop PVPs for are items such as domestic production, biosecurity standards, and antibiotic use practices, either no antibiotics or judicious use of antibiotics. And coming out of this session, I think there's some good momentum. I understand that my colleagues at AMS joined some of our colleagues at Aphis earlier this week to host a meeting with some from the industry and the National Aquaculture Association to talk more about process verified programs and the like. And we're certainly ready and willing to provide you whatever assistance we can. And so with that, on behalf of AMS and my colleagues at the Food and Nutrition Service also, we look forward to assisting the aquaculture industry as best we are able. Thank you, Caird.
All right, Carl, thank you. And so we'll turn to the final session report out, supporting aquaculture. This session was led by Andy Jermolowicz from Rural Development, Christopher Vazquez from Farm Service Agency, and Alex Sereno from the Risk Management Agency. Please go ahead.
Hey, Caird, can you hear me?
I can, Alex, thank you.
All right. So, yes, supporting aquaculture was a deep dive session hosted by ARS Rural Development, Farm Service Agency, and Risk Management Agency. And to echo what all the other reporters have said, we had a great participation. We had a really diverse group of people all called in and joined us, and really good discussion. Rural Development, Farm Service Agency, and RMA are USDA agencies, a little bit different than what reported out already. We're more involved in the, I guess you just call it, safety net programs for agriculture. And RMA, the agency I work for in particular, manages the federal crop insurance program. Farm Service Agency has many disaster programs. And Rural Development has absolute load of programs that, guaranteed loans, other things that can help support and manage risk. So we asked our group about 5 different questions. We asked them, what is USDA doing now to help you manage risk? What gaps exist in aquaculture risk management that USDA needs to address? What is the biggest obstacle to USA being seen as a federal lead for supporting aquaculture? How can USDA strengthen our work with aquaculture? And when working with USDA, what do our stakeholders, or what did those stakeholders that were in our session, what did they think worked the best? So next slide, please. And these slides are kind of a high-level look at the feedback we got back. So what is USDA doing now to help us manage risk? Compared to dairy, swine, and poultry, aquaculture producers felt like they needed our programs, but they also felt maybe a little bit more distant than they should be. So maybe that actually should be in the gap area. But what I think was really the theme from that was that people, when they looked at our programs, they liked what they saw. They wanted the programs that RMA, FSA, and Rural Development offered to be available to them. And then we had some feedback directly more focused on the catfish industry, that there are USDA programs that are available to catfish producers and that in some areas do work for catfish producers, but tweaks were needed. In particular, bird predation was something that was pointed out as something that needed to be addressed. They decided that there was a good working relationship between the industry and USDA, and we got really good feedback on guaranteed loan programs, which are not an RMA thing, but I think come from Rural Development and Farm Service Agency. So second question we had, what gaps exist in aquaculture risk management that USDA needs to address? I think the biggest gap that we got, or that we got feedback on, was just that we understand our programs, but maybe we don't really understand aquaculture as well as we need to. So training our personnel to have the expertise and experience to work with aquaculture is important. And also, I think it's on the next slide, but we also got a lot of feedback about how important land grant extension is and how extension agents are often that bridge. And so those people being fully funded and those positions being filled is something that's going to be very important for people to be able to take advantage of USDA's programs. One of the folks on one of our breakout sessions noted that in 2018, when there were flooding in the Midwest, the disaster assistance that came afterwards, there were few aquaculture producers that qualified. And so most ended up having to take private insurance and not benefiting from the federal programs that farmers around them were. So that's an area where we need to address as an agency. And we had a lot of feedback on crop insurance. And crop insurance is something that we can tell there's a lot of demand for, but the existing programs that we have now need to be updated and enhanced in order for us to be able to adequately serve needs of aquaculture producers. Next slide. So the next question, what was the biggest obstacle for USDA to be viewed as one of the federal leads and supporting aquaculture and advancing aquaculture? And this we had really great discussion on. I think people mentioned competition with terrestrial farmers for our attention and resources. Another thing that came up was just that the regulatory oversight around agriculture went a lot of different ways. It's a diverse industry and there are a lot of different regulators. You have NOAA, you have USDA, you have FDA. And so it's hard for growers to understand where they need to go, and it's hard for USDA to stand out when competing with other regulations. Complexity of government was another thing that came up over and over. The extension, agriculture extension positions was another thing that came up as an obstacle. Again, those people seen as a bridge between USDA and farmers in the field. And then there was also some discussion about misconceptions about aquaculture, not necessarily at the federal level, but more at the state level, where state regulators don't see aquaculture as agriculture. They see it as a natural resource, as something to be regulated as a public good. And that's a big challenge. So that was something that we got a lot of conversation on as well. So the question we followed up with was, how can USDA strengthen our work with stakeholders and partners across such a diverse industry? And the idea was just the stakeholder meetings and having committees, regular feedback with the industry is important. I know personally from my work at RMA, we've been trying to do a better job with that with the shellfish industry. And I think, going forward, other parts of aquaculture too, we're going to try to be more and more present and more visible at you guys' meetings. They also wanted USDA to help the industry be seen in a positive light in the public. It's come up several times in this meeting already. Just explain aquaculture, use science, explain to people what aquaculture is and that it is a good thing, that it is agriculture. It's not some sort of abusive environment. And then they wanted us again to connect with state level organizations so that they can help people where we have money through grants. We can help people access these grants. And then targeted outreach, like I said earlier, get to meetings, teach people about our programs, listen to people, talk to people, have a dialogue where aquaculture producers and aquaculture leaders, they have questions, they know where to go. Next slide. Last question we asked was, when working with USDA, what works for you? We got positive feedback on working groups. I guess the idea of USDA as regulators or as government agencies, listening to growers was very appealing. Getting out, getting in front of meetings was another thing that we were suggested to do more of. And then some specific meetings that were listed were something called Honor the Harvest, going to Aquaculture America and World Aquaculture Society meetings. And then they'd like to see USDA expand attendance at some species-specific meetings, whether it's Catfish Farmers of America or Trout Farmers of America, that we would get out in front of people, talk to people, and explain our programs directly to folks, and then let people give us feedback on where we could do things a little bit better, a little bit differently. So that was a very high-level summary of what we discussed. Andy or Christopher, is there anything from you guys' perspectives I left out?
Thanks, Alex. No, I think you did an excellent job of summarizing what the conversation was during our session. Thank you.
And I agree, Alex. You did a fantastic job. I don't have anything to add from that. But just to, I guess, go on and ask for everyone's help as you're talking with your counterparts out there. One thing that came up with our working group, it's just the lack of education within FSA, but you all can help us with that by encouraging all of your aquaculture producers to run for their local county committees. And the more knowledge that we have out in the field, it's would be of eminent importance just to help us to get an understanding of what's going on, because for the most part with FSA, most of the county committees, they just don't have a knowledge of what's going on with aquaculture. So if we were able to get you all on those on those county committees, it would be a great help. So that's all I wanted to plug in there. So thank you, I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Caird.
All right, Alex, Chris, Andy, thank you all. And so with that, here in a second, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Peggy Biga to provide some closing remarks. But first, I wanted to thank all of you for attending today and for contributing to all of our listening sessions. And I especially want to thank our speakers. We had amazing presentations, extremely informative, and definitely material that will help us shape our programs for aquaculture here at USDA. So Peggy, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Caird. And thank everybody for attending today. I think, it looks like a lot of people stuck with us throughout the whole day, so we really appreciate that. And there were some themes that emerged, I think, from not only the speaker session, the plenary session this morning, but also the readouts that across almost all 6 of the readout groups, we heard the importance of maintaining the extension agent pool with aquatic background and aquaculture knowledge. Also training and education, whether that has to do with extension agents, but also in the veterinary fields. That came up in a couple of different listening sessions. Another aspect that was resounded in every single conversation we had was that we need more effective communication from USDA with the stakeholders, but also across USDA as a whole. So within the agency itself, and then with USDA and other federal partners. And this webinar, hopefully, I mean, we spent between 18 and 20 hours with stakeholders over the month of November, and we really appreciate everybody's time. It was a really heavy lift, and Caird and I spent some good quality time with all of you, and we really appreciate all of the feedback and your willingness to participate. And we hope that this launches you know, successful endeavors moving into the future with better communication at the helm. And also, I think that the kind of the most interesting that came about kind of point is that USDA really should lean into aquaculture, and that was pretty apparent as well. And one of the reasons why we named this webinar Aquaculture is Agriculture. So with that, we invite you to, if you haven't already, or if you have additional feedback that you would like for us to hear about, please email either myself or Caird or both of us, or any of the leadership team, any of your feedback before December 18th. And we look forward to receiving those. They will be included in the white paper that we put together. And the white paper, as well as a recording of this webinar, will be hosted on the USDA Aquaculture website, as mentioned before. We will send an email out once the webinar is published on the website. We will send an email out to all registrants with that link so that you can go directly to it. And also a list of all of the speakers and their email addresses if you would like to contact them with follow-up feedback. And so with that, I would like to give another heartfelt thank you to the organizing committee that helped Caird and I put this together, OCS for allowing me the time and the structure to host the webinar. All of the listening session leaders, thank you guys so much for coming together and showing your interest to the stakeholders in aquaculture and listening and being present. The AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow Program, several of the other fellows like myself participated in our listening sessions as note takers, and I know a couple of them are in the attendee listening today. So thank you guys so much for helping us out. And most importantly, thank you to all of the participants who participated in our listening sessions, and again, spent numerous hours communicating with us in November. And thank you all for being here today. And I think that concludes our webinar, right, Caird?
Sure does. Thank you, everyone.